All right, good morning. I decided, since I'm mentioning last couple of weeks, I've been talking about all these people and all these places, and I decided to put a little bit of a simplification of what some of these people are. And we were talking about all these places, like Caesarea Maritima, Joppa, all these places that Herod the Great built up, like Masada, Herodium, Machaerus, just so you have an idea what the Holy Land looked like back then and where places were. Last time we left off, we were talking about the Herodium, and we're going to be going from the Herodium to talk about the end of Herod the Great, and we'll be going from how do we get from these dynastic family running the country, basically the Herods, to Roman governors, because we are talking about Josephus's book about the Jewish-Roman war that happened in the first century that Jesus prophesied that was going to happen because of their rejection of him. But a lot of Josephus' book is not just a description of a war, it's a description of what was the first century events that led up to the war, who were the antagonists and who were the groups that fought against the Romans. So I'm gonna start off talking about Herod the Great. This was his family here. As you can see, it's not like the usual family. You have people that just kind of end, but and there's no kids. Like, well, what kind of family is, you know? But these are the three sons that actually inherited the kingdom when he died, and they weren't the original ones that he had planned to inherit. These were the three, but he killed all three of them. So Herod's family is kind of unusual. That's the only thing I can think of when I'm thinking of Herod's family. You see some of these trees out there, you're like, wow, why did they just cut? You know, that's kind of a weird looking tree. Why did they just cut the whole thing down? But that's basically how I visually think of Herod's family. Being split. Yeah. Well, you just hack off this branch. Hack off that one. Okay, well, we still have a tree. This is one of the famous quotes about him. It says, this is from a historian who recorded something that Caesar Augustus said about Herod. He said, because Herod being Jewish, he said, I would rather be Herod's pig than his son, since pigs are not butchered by Jews. This guy's safe. If he's in the Herod household, you're not gonna touch him. He makes a good pet, but that's about it. They're not gonna turn him into bacon.
Pretty cute, didn't they?
I know. Yeah, I was looking for pictures of pigs. I'm like, oh, that one's kind of cute.
By the way, we're having pulled pork tonight. So.
Not in a Jewish household. Oh, he wasn't Jewish, he was Roman, wasn't he? Oh my, that's right.
So,
oops.
This is the familiar story that you know about Herod the king, and he heard that there was a king, or king of the Jews, and I got to be careful not to say the three wise men, because there was three gifts, and I don't want to say they weren't kings, and they probably weren't from the Orient. They were probably from Persia. So I have to be careful how I word this, because we get brainwashed by these traditional songs, and we're like, wait a minute, they don't make any sense. But so this is where Herod heard of he heard from the wise men about King of the Jews, what? So, and it says all of Jerusalem with him. They were all troubled. They're like, oh, Herod's angry. We're all nuts. Nobody's safe. So, I'm not going to read the whole thing because you're familiar with this, but So it says, I'll start with verse 8. He sent them to Bethlehem. Go search diligently for the young child, and we have found him. Bring me word again, that I may come and worship him also. So the three magi, they see the star. It's not over a manger, it's over a house. Joseph and Mary are in a house at this time in Bethlehem. I don't know if they rented it or bought it, but they didn't go back to Nazareth after the tax made them go to Bethlehem. They decided to stay in Bethlehem, so this is where the Magi are. Notice it's come into the house. So when you ever see those manger scenes with the shepherds and the wise men, that's wrong. What?
The shepherds are right, the wise.
Yeah. The wise men they're not supposed to be there. They went to their house later. It was probably a year or so later. So they presented them gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh, and so they were warned in a dream. They went a different way. Then the angel appeared to Joseph, so he has to flee. There are refugees in Egypt while Herod the Great is still alive. So it says Herod will seek the young child to destroy him. So they departed at night. Well, we know Joseph was poor because, well, we know from the Bible that Mary offered 2 turtle doves in Jerusalem instead of a lamb and a turtle dove. The 2 turtle doves was a provision for people that couldn't afford a lamb, so we know they were poor. So I don't think that gold, frankincense, and myrrh, I don't think it just sat on a mantle somewhere. I think there was a divine plan that, hey, Joseph's poor, he's got to go pay for an expensive trip to Egypt and hide out there. So I think that gold was probably spent pretty quickly on just paying daily bills. But so they were there until the death of Herod, and it says, "Out of Egypt I have called my son." And of course, there's this what's called the massacre of innocents, where he killed every child, male child under 2 years old or younger. This is the passage that was being quoted when Israel was a child. Then I loved him and called my son out of Egypt. So, you hear rabbis say, "Oh, well, Matthew was misquoting the Bible. That passage is about us Jewish people. It's not about Jesus." But what the Jewish people were being is they were being a type of a much bigger event. They were foreshadowing when they went into Egypt. They were refugees because they would have starved if they stayed in Holy Land. So they were refugees, and then they came out of Egypt. So they were foreshadowing a much more important event, which is the Son of God going to Egypt as a refugee, and then being called out of Egypt. So this event happens after the death of Herod. So this is Josephus's in his book, The Jewish War. He's covering the whole 70 years. He's not just covering the 7-year war. He's talking about all the events that are leading up to it. So he's talking about, this is the Herod the Great's, or Herod the Builder, as he's also called. This is the end of his life. And it says, now Herod's distemper became more and more severe to him. And this because of his disorders fell upon him in his old age, and when he was in a melancholy condition, for he was already 70 years of age. So he's 70 years old, and he's dying. He's on his deathbed. But he kind of gets weird. Like, he starts doing cruel, weird things that are not typical. He ruled for over 3 decades. So all of a sudden, towards the end of his life, he's doing these unusual things. I'll explain that. There also now happened to him, among his other calamities, a certain popular sedition. There were 2 men of learning in the city of Jerusalem who were thought the most skillful in the laws of their country, and were on that account had a very great esteem all over the nation. So he goes on to name these 2 teachers. He goes on to name these 2 teachers, and then he says there was a bunch of young students that were they were students of these these two teachers, and since Herod was dying, they said, "Oh well, this is a good time." Herod had says now when the king was wearing away with melancholy and with distemper, they dropped words to their acquaintance how it was now a very proper time to defend the cause of God and to put down what had been erected contrary to the laws of their country. And what happened towards Herod's life is he put this image of an eagle in the temple in Jerusalem, and well, that's a graven image. You're not supposed to be doing that. And he built the temple. He spent decades building this temple, and now he's stirring up trouble at the end of his life. For it was unlawful there should be any such thing in the temple as images or faces or the like representation of any animal whatsoever. So this is one example of what Herod the Great did that his sons didn't do, as far as I know. And even the Roman governors would avoid doing this. They would avoid putting images, like images of Caesar or images of eagles or other animals on the coins. So this is one of Herod's coins. Now this one is a kosher coin. It has just a helmet and stars and palm branches. But this is another one of his coins. This is his son, who ruled. He built up the city of Tiberias on the Sea of Galilee, but again, there's no images here. This is his other son, who ended up getting half the kingdom. Who he had rulership of Judea and Samaria and the southern regions, but again, there's just an anchor and a wreath. This is him in front of Caesar, being granted his Ethgarch. And then again, this is Herod's grandson. Again, just a little umbrella and barley. But Herod, he put an eagle on a coin, which it was not acceptable for the Jewish people. But here's another. You can't really tell it very well, but there's an eagle on that coin too. But it says, now the king had put up a golden eagle over the great gate of the temple, which these learned men exhorted them to cut down, and told them that if there should any danger arise, it was a glorious thing to die for the laws of their country. So the teachers are telling them, hey, this is a good cause. If you get killed for this, we took an image down from the temple. So the students went ahead, and I guess the students being better shape than the teachers, because you had to climb down a rope, but because that the soul was immortal and that an eternal enjoyment of happiness did await such as died on that account. They obviously weren't Sadducees, they were probably, I would say Pharisees, because Sadducees don't believe in eternal life. While the mean-spirited and those that were not wise enough to show a right love of their souls preferred death by a disease before that which is the result of a virtuous behavior. I think they're referring to Herod the Great. He was dying of a disease towards the end of his life. At the same time that these men made this speech to their disciples, a rumor was spread abroad that the king was dying, and so they had to let themselves down from the top of the temple with thick cords at midday. So obviously everybody saw it, and they chopped down the golden eagle with axes. They told the king's captain, and they caught 40 of these students, brought them to the king, obviously, brought them to King Herod. This is Herod we're talking about, so he's not going to just, slap them on the wrist or throw them in jail for a couple months. So, and when he asked them, first of all, whether they had been so hardy as to cut down the eagle, they confessed they had done so, and so they did it at the command of the law of their country. So they did what they thought was right. And it says, then he further asked them how they could be so joyful when they were to be put to death. They replied, because they should enjoy greater happiness after they were dead. So that's the story that Josephus records. This is this is his other writing, Jewish Antiquities. So towards the end of his life, I mentioned that he killed 3 of his sons. This is one that he killed 5 days before he died. So he ended up rewriting his will, and then he leaves it to these three sons, Archelaus, Antipas, and Philip the Tetrarch. So after he dies, this is what the Holy Land looks like. He got three sons taking over different sections. And then it says he let them all. So he ends up leaving a whole bunch of money to to Caesar Augustus, and then he leaves a bunch of dresses to Caesar Augustus' wife, Julia. And so it says that he died the 5th day before he died. He killed one of his sons. So he was. This is summarizing his life: 34 years since he had been declared the king of the Romans. 37 years as a king. A man he was of great barbarity towards all men equally. So this is Josephus summing up King Herod's life as a barbarous man and a slave to his passion, but above the consideration of what was right. Yet he was favored by fortune as much as any man ever was, and for from a private man he became a king, and though he were encompassed with 10,000 dangers, he got clear of them all and continued his life till a very old age. But then as to the affairs of his family and his children, which indeed according to his own opinion, he was also very unfortunate, because he was able to conquer his enemies, yet in my opinion, he was herein very unfortunate. So, Herod's dying, he's at another one of his palaces, which I didn't mention last time, but because this wasn't a palace fortress, this was just a palace. This one's in Jericho, it's in the West Bank, which is why we have another sign that's written in Arabic. Tul Abu El Alay. And that's what it would have looked like based on archaeology. There's another angle. That's called Wadi Kelt, and that's the road going from Jericho to Jerusalem. This is what it looks like today. It's a big excavation site. And this is this road here from Jericho to Jerusalem. You can see it's quite hilly and windy. So this is where they brought his body. He wanted to be buried in the Herodium, so this is where he was buried. This is like a small replica of what the mausoleum actually looked like. They built a replica there. The actual mausoleum is in the Israeli Museum. It was destroyed, but they have the pieces there, and they tried to reassemble. At least this is just the top. It was like 100-something feet tall. So this is just part of it. And that's his tomb back there. So I read something when they were doing the excavations around there. They said, "Well, which one's Herod's? Probably the one that's most smashed." So it was smashed in pieces. This is mostly it's mostly rebuilt. Just a couple pieces are actual original. So after this was over, they prepared for his funeral, it being Archelaus' care. So this is his son that he left half the kingdom to. So accordingly, he brought out all his ornaments to adorn the pomp of the funeral. The body was carried in a golden bier, embroidered with very precious stones and a great variety, and it was covered over with purple, as well as the body itself. He had a diadem upon his head, and above it a crown of gold. He also had a scepter on his right hand. His sons, and there was a whole bunch of soldiers, people following him. So they went about a mile to the Herodium, and there he was buried, and that was the end of his life. So now it's an important event because Joseph, Mary, and Jesus are in Egypt. They're waiting for Herod to die so they can get the all clear to go back to Israel. I put this picture up. I don't know if you can figure out where I'm going with this.
The apple doesn't
Yeah, the apple doesn't fall far from the trees. So that was Archelaus. That was his son that ended up inheriting Judea and Samaria and the southern regions of Idumea, which was basically half the kingdom. That was half the population and the wealth. So this is actually Wikipedia. I don't like Wikipedia that much because a lot of times they're wrong, but in this case they kind of summarized what happened after Herod died. His son took over, and he didn't handle that whole incident where Herod the Great had killed the students and the teachers. Basically his son inherited a mess, and he had the chance to clean it up and make amends, but he ended up stirring it up and making it worse because he was, the apple that didn't fall far from the tree. So this is when he summarizes, Wikipedia summarizing Herod's people ordered the death of 2 teachers and the 40 youths. So Archelaus began to worry as people started streaming into the temple. So there's a disturbance, Herod the Great's dead, he's in charge. So how does he handle it? There's mourners, there's protesters, they want justice, they want things to be made right. He ends up sending his troops in to calm things down. They got swords and weapons and horses, and not a good way to calm down a disturbance. So he sends his cohorts to reason with the seditionists to stop their uprising and wait until he can go to Rome and appear before Caesar and come back. I'll take care of it when I come back. So they ended up stowing his troops, killing some. They go back to make sacrifices. Archelaus sends his troops in, kills 3,000 men, cancels Passover. So he sails to Caesar because he's ready to be made king by Caesar. His own family members don't like him. They're sailing to Rome too because they want to tell Caesar, don't make him king. People don't want him ruling over them. So now it says, but now it came, this is back again the Josephus and the Jewish wars, but now came another accusation from the Jews against Archelaus at Rome, which he was to answer. It was made by those ambassadors who before the revolt had come by Varus' permission. He's the governor of Syria. He's the one who Archelaus has to answer to plead for the liberty of their country. Those that came were 50 in number, but there were 8,000 of the Jews at Rome who supported them. And when Caesar had assembled a council of the principal Romans in Apollo's temple, so it goes on, and now upon the permission that was given the accusers to speak, they in the first place went over Herod's breaches of their law and said that he was not a king, but the most barbarous of tyrants. So they had over 3 decades of Herod. They didn't want another 3 decades of his son ruling things just like he did. So while yet this Archelaus, lest he should be in danger of not being thought the genuine son of Herod, he began his reign with the murder of 3,000 citizens. So this is obviously sarcasm. They're before Caesar. They're like, he wants to just be just like his dad. So now the people wanted to actually become a Roman province. They're like, well, can we have a Roman governor instead of the Herods? Syria seems to be going just fine. Why can't we just join Syria? I mean, eventually that's going to happen, but you got to be careful what you ask for. So at this time, this is somebody who defends Archelaus. Well, the Jews they're a hard nation to be ruled. They're naturally disobedient to kings. You gotta take it into Archelaus' account. He's trying to make sure there's no uprising, and so he's defending him. And then Caesar makes his decision. He decides, well, I'm gonna acknowledge Herod the Great's will. I'm gonna make Archelaus half of the king. He gets half of the kingdom. He's not a king though. He's one step short of that. I'm gonna make him an ethnarch. And he said, well, if you do a good job, I'll make you a king afterwards. So that was the deal. He gets half the kingdom. He becomes an ethnarch if he does a good job. He can go back to Rome, and Caesar Augustus will pronounce him king. And the other two sons, they're called tetrarchs, which is a ruler of a fourth. So they get one gets a quarter, another gets a quarter. One's called Philip the Tetrarch. The other one's called Herod Antipas, and he's contesting with Caesar. Don't let my brother. They're not half brothers. They're brothers. Philip is a half brother. So this is talking about the revenue, and this is Philip. He's given certain regions. So, Idumea and all Judea and Samaria were parts of the ethnarchy of Archelaus. Although Samaria was eased of 1/4 of its taxes, out of regard for their not having revolted with the rest of the nation. How nice. Samaritans gotta get the best deal out of everybody.
Could you put this in perspective to Christ's death as far as time frame?
70 years.
So this is probably what's happening is, well, Joseph is told, okay, now Herod, those who seek the child's life are now dead. You can go back to Israel. So it's Joseph is worried. If you read, I believe it's Luke, he's worried because he hears Archelaus is now running the place that he was.
Okay.
Sounds like he was going back to was Bethlehem, and he's also warned in a dream. Archelaus is in charge. So what happens is it says Joseph turned aside and went up to Nazareth.
Okay.
So he didn't even go back to where they were living, where his job was.
Sure.
Where their house was.
Okay.
So.
Yep.
So. Again, this is another picture. You can see Archelaus, the bad son, or the more wicked one, I should say, is in charge of all this region, and the less wicked son, which I can only say less wicked because he killed John the Baptist, but he's in charge of these regions. So that's where Joseph brings Jesus to Mary. And there's a simplified thing of it. So what you were saying about put this in context of scripture. So this is Matthew chapter 2. So it says, now when Herod was dead, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt, saying, arise, take the young child and his mother and go to the land of Israel, for those who sought the young child's life are dead. Then he arose, took the young child and his mother, and came into the land of Israel. And when he heard that Archelaus was reigning over Judea instead of his father, he was afraid to go there. He might have been hearing, because there's a road between Israel and Egypt. He might have been hearing from passerbyers that, hey, did you hear Passover's canceled? Yeah, this new guy, his son, just killed 3,000 people on the Temple Mountain, canceled Passover. He's wicked. So they're like, oh, well, we don't want to go back there. And it says, being warned by God in a dream, he turned aside. So it sounds like he was heading back towards Bethlehem, into the region of Galilee. So this guy, his brother, Philip's his half brother, but this is his brother, Herod Antipas, the one who killed John the Baptist. Eventually, Jesus is going to see him again in about 30-something years in the trial, where Pilate sends him to Herod Antipas. But for now, Joseph brings Jesus and Mary to the Galilee region. So they settle in Nazareth because Joseph has been there before. That's where they were coming down during the tax. They left Nazareth and went to Bethlehem. So it says, and when he heard that Archelaus was reigning over Judea instead of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. So he turned aside into the region of Galilee, because that was under a different governorship. And he came and dwelt in the city called Nazareth, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the prophets, he shall be called a Nazarene. So ultimately God's in charge of the situation. He could just strike a king down dead if he wants to, and eventually he did strike down Herod's grandson dead. That's later in Acts, but in this case, he lets the chips fall, as they are. Jesus told Pontius Pilate. Pilate said, "Don't you know I have authority to crucify you, or I have the authority to set you free?" And he said, "You would have no power against me if it were not given to you from above." So ultimately, God is in charge of the situation. He wants Jesus to be raised in Nazareth, so this is the way things happen. Prophecies are being fulfilled. So this is the route that's happening. I'm sure Mary's probably tired. I would be carried pregnant. Oh, we gotta go now. Where do we have to go? And she's carrying a young baby and having to change diapers, and there's no McDonald's or anywhere, places to stop.
So all this transpired, Randy, when you start, is about 2 years, is what you're saying. What you've been talking about.
Yeah, I think it's about. I don't know for sure.
Yeah,
I think it's probably about. It says he was a young child, so
okay,
I don't know how long they were in Egypt.
okay.
So.
Oh, yeah, okay. Short time though. I mean, when you were first talking, I'm looking at this whole king thing took 10 or 15 years. It seems to happen in a pretty short time.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know exactly when Herod put the eagle up and all that, but it sounds like it was towards the end of his life.
Okay.
And yeah, I don't know how long they were in Egypt. Maybe a year or so.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if the Lord Jesus was like 2 or 3 at this time. If I had to guess. So this is the route again. They're going to Nazareth to Bethlehem to Jerusalem to Bethlehem to Egypt to back from Egypt back to Nazareth. Again, here's another thing in the Herod's family. So these are the 3 we're talking about here. Antipas, Archelaus, and there's Philip. He was a brother through a different wife of Herod. So now Archelaus is in charge. He takes charge of the ethnarchy, which is what it's called, and use not the Jews only. But so this is Josephus in the Jewish Wars. He's telling how well Archelaus's rulership was going, and it wasn't going very well. So he used not the Jews only, but the Samaritans also barbarously, and this out of his resentment of their old quarrels with him. Whereupon they both of them sent ambassadors against him to Caesar. So they're sending a delegate to Caesar. We don't want this guy anymore. He's terrible. And in the 9th year of his government, he was banished to Vienna. Now it's called Vienna, a city of Gaul, which it's in France. So he's getting banished. So he's gone, and his effects were put into Caesar's treasury. His wealth was put into the Rome's treasury. So there's where he ended up. Right there. This is Italy. Right here, he ended up somewhere in southeast France. Actually, it doesn't look too bad of a place. So I mean, it's not like the Russians where they banish you to Siberia. I mean, he got banished to France. So
I'm sure it didn't look like that then.
what's that?
I'm sure it didn't look like that then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, this theater was there. That's a Roman theater, so I don't know what the rest of it looked like, but it was part of the Roman Empire, so they did have a Roman amphitheater. Now Archelaus' part of Judea was reduced into a province, so this is an important event here. And Coponius, who's Coponius? One of the equestrian order among the Romans was sent it was actually a prefect. They were called prefects, and then they were later called procurators. But having the power of death put into his hands by Caesar. So now we have a Roman governor. He has the power to execute the death penalty. Under his administration, it was that a certain Galilean whose name was Judas prevailed with his countrymen to revolt. Now Jewish people don't like this because now Romans have more taxes that they can administer. So Josephus is talking about this as being one of the seeds of the war that was going to come later. It's about 60 years later, but the seeds were being sown because now you no longer have a Jewish rulership. You have a Roman governor coming in, being sent from Caesar to run the Jewish province. Not the whole Holy Land, but the half of it. Because these two guys are still, Herod Antipas, he's still running Galilee. That's where Joseph, Mary, and Jesus went. And this is Philip the Tetrarch. He's running the southern Syria and northern Jordan area. So, and said they were cowards. So this is a rabble rouser named Judas of Galilee, and said they were cowards if they would endure to pay a tax to the Romans and would after God submit to mortal men as their lords. This man was a teacher of a peculiar sect. Now he doesn't name the sect here, but this is actually a new sect. There was Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes, and he goes on to name this new sect. And this we figure out is the Zealots. So of his own, and he's the founder of it. And this happens after Rome sends their first governor after this guy Archelaus is banished. So, and it was not like all the rest of those leaders. And again, he goes on to describe this zealot, that a founder of this group called the Zealots. And there's another group that broke off from them. They're called the Sicarii. They're basically assassins, cloak and dagger assassins. They're the ones that take over Masada. So Josephus is angry at this guy for founding this group that wants to fight against Rome and have all these wars because of taxes. So it says, and the nation was infected with this doctrine to an incredible degree. One violent war came after us after another, and we lost our friends, which used to alleviate our pains. There were also very great robberies and murder of our principal men. This was done in pretense indeed for the public welfare, but in reality for the hopes of gain to themselves. Once arose seditions from the murders of men, sometimes fell on those of their own people. They were fighting against themselves. They couldn't get along, these zealots. When they eventually came to Jerusalem when Titus was there with the Roman armies, they're like, well, he was asking his dad Vespasian, should we just let them fight? And he's like, well, just let them fight against themselves. Eventually we'll just be able to just walk in. They would have all killed themselves by then. So they were fighting against themselves by the madness of these men towards one another, while their desire was that none of the adverse party might be left. The Jews had for a great while had three sects of philosophy peculiar to themselves: the sect of the Essenes, the sect of the Sadducees, and the third was the Pharisees. Although I have already spoken, so I'm not going to mention what he talked about. But the four sects of Jewish philosophy, I added that: Zealots, Sicarii. Judas the Galilean was the author. These men agree in all other things so they're kind of like the Pharisees. They believe in life after death, obviously, because they're willing to die for the cause. But they have an inviolable attachment to liberty and say that God is to be their only ruler and Lord. They also do not value dying of any kinds of death, nor indeed do they heed the deaths of their relations and friends, nor can any such fear make them call any man Lord. So he's saying that this group started because now we have a Roman governor, there's more taxes, so this group of zealots is formed to counter the Roman control. And this is actually this is the governor that when the whole war broke out, it was Gessius Florus, and it was Gessius Florus' time that the nation began to grow mad with this distemper, who was our procurator, and who occasioned the Jews to go wild with its with it by the abuse of his authority, and to make them revolt from the Romans, and these are the sects of the Jewish philosophy. So this is later, he's showing towards the end, it's a cruel Roman governor, and then the combination of the zealots not wanting taxes, it became a tinderbox that just imploded. Now this is what we know about these governors. This is the first prefect after the Herod dynasty. This is one of the weird incidences that Josephus records. I thought I'm reading this, I'm like, did this really happen? It sounds like a college prank, but anyway, I'll go ahead and read it. As Coponius, who we told you was sent along with Cyrenius, who that's the Syrian governor at the time, was exercising his office of procurator and governing Judea, the following accidents happened. As the Jews were celebrating the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which we call Passover, it was customary for the priests to open the temple gates just after midnight. When therefore these gates were first opened, some of the Samaritans came, because we know from the woman at the well that, she said, "You talk to me, a Samaritan woman? Don't you know that the Jews and the Samaritans don't have any dealings with each other?" So they're, we know from the woman at the well that the Samaritans and the Jews do not get along. And this is a historical account of them not getting along. The Samaritans came privately into Jerusalem and threw about dead men's bones in the cloisters, on which account the Jews afterward excluded them out of the temple. So they're throwing these bones on the temple, rendering it unclean, which they had not used to do at such festivals. And on other accounts, they also they watched the temple more carefully than they had formerly done, a little after which accident Coponius returned to Rome. So that's all we know about this governor is this incident happened with the Samaritans, stirring up trouble in the temple. So he's recalled to Rome. Now, according to the Mishnah, there's one of the doors in the temple is called Coponius door, because they think it's the door where the Samaritans snuck in with their bag of bones and dumped it and rendered the temple unclean on the Passover. Because the Samaritans don't believe that the Jewish temple is the right temple. The Samaritan woman said, "We worship on this mountain. You worship in Jerusalem." So in the Samaritans' mind, we're worshiping in the right place. You guys are worshiping in the wrong place. So the Mishnah was something like a Jewish compilation that happened at that time. Supposedly that's the door right there. They think it might be the door where the Samaritans snuck in. And these guys years later thinking, what were we thinking with this college prank we were doing? That was a joke. But these are actually Samaritans today. There is like less than 1,000 of them. There's like 800 of them. But yeah, and they still sacrifice animals, and they still worship on Mount Gerizim.
They live in Israel.
Yeah, they live in Israel. It's I guess it's I'm not sure the name. I think it's called Shechem. They're in it's a West Bank town, so they're pretty much, they speak Arabic. But I think when they read the Bible, they actually read the Hebrew. So I didn't read too much. There's not too much record about these other governors. But then we're getting up to Pontius Pilate. But before him, there's this governor called Valerius Gratus, and this is kind of an interesting history. It says that he was procurator or prefect for like over a decade. But the only thing we know about this guy who came before Pontius Pilate is he had a thing for firing high priests. So this is Jewish. This is Josephus again. He said, Tiberius Nero, his wife Julia's son, succeeded. He was now the third emperor, and he sent. So Tiberius is the emperor now. It's no longer Augustus. So he sent Valerius Gratus to be prefect of Judea and to succeed Annius Rufus. This man deprived Annas, this was Annas the high priest, or also called Ananus, of the high priesthood. He was high priest for a very long time, and high priest is supposed to be a lifetime appointment. If you know from the book of Numbers 35, it says when the high priest dies, the people who had committed manslaughter that were in these sanctuary cities, they were now absolved of their crime, and they could leave the sanctuary city and not be in danger of the avenger of blood. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's in Numbers chapter 35. But the high priest was a lifetime appointment. You're not supposed to have Roman governors indiscriminately hiring, firing who they want, making it like a political appointment. So this is what the Romans are doing now. So this guy had an affinity for firing high priests, and this is all we know about him, the Valerius Gracchus. This man deprived Ananus of the high priesthood and appointed Ismail, son of Fabi, to be high priest. He also deprived him in a little while and ordained Eleazar, the son of Ananus, who had been high priest before, to be high priest. Which office he had held for a year, Gratus deprived him of it, and gave the high priesthood to Simon, the son of Camathus. And when he had possessed that dignity no longer than a year, Joseph Caiaphas was made his successor. So Caiaphas is actually his son-in-law. So when Gratus had done those things, he went back to Rome. And after he had tarried in Judea 11 years, then Pontius Pilate came as his successor. So that's the only notable thing about this guy is he fired a lot of people. I don't know if you remember it was about 10, 15 years ago, me and my wife used to watch this goofy reality TV show. There was lots of reality TV shows back in the time, but I didn't like the one where they're on the island and they're getting voted off because it was called Survivor.
Yeah.
There was another one, it was a business one where people were trying to get a job, and they would get voted off. They would get fired actually. So they would have a table full of people, and if you didn't perform to expectations, you got fired. So this guy just kind of reminded me of that reality TV show.
Oh, that's funny.
Who's that?
You're fired. But that's just what I was thinking. I don't know. It just kind of stuck in my head about this governor. But
You know he patented that.
oh really?
Yeah, if anybody else uses furniture fired on it, so they
You can't use it on TV.
Oh, wow.
It's like Hershey. They patent the color orange. It actually says at the back. It says they have a patent on the color orange.
Oh my
Anyway. So now he's sent back. We have Caiaphas as the high priest. Now, I don't know if you notice sometimes you're reading certain passages of the Bible, you're trying to figure out, well, who's the high priest? Is it Annas or is it Caiaphas? It seems like Annas seems to be pulling all the strings here. Like Jesus was arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane. It wasn't Caiaphas, it was Annas. So if you look at Luke, it says, now in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar, Pontius Pilate being governor of Judea, and Herod being tetrarch of Galilee, Philip the tetrarch, and Lysanias the tetrarch of Abilene, Annas and Caiaphas being the high priests. The word of God came unto John, the son of Zacharias. So the question is, well, who's the high priest at this time? The answer I would say is, well, it's kind of complicated because Annas is technically not supposed to be fired. It's a lifetime appointment, which is why he's pulling all the strings. But his son-in-law Caiaphas is officially, according to Rome, the high priest. So I guess the short answer is it's kind of complicated. Now we're on to Pontius Pilate. He's now the governor. Before 1961, Pontius Pilate was a figment of the Christians' imagination. He was a fictional character created by the Christians. He didn't actually exist, according to the historians with the British accents, the PhDs. Pontius Pilate probably never existed, and he was made up by the Christians. So they kind of had to stop talking after they find this what's called the Pilate Stone, which was this stone that's now in the Israeli Museum in Jerusalem, which says, and I'll show you a close. This is a replica, but it says Pontius Pilatus, the prefect of Judea. So there it is. You can go into the Israel Museum in Jerusalem and walk in, and there it is off in a corner there, an actual record that he's a real person. He actually existed. You gotta watch some of these historians on these history channels. They like this. They like to challenge things and say, "Oh, well, that probably never happened. This person probably never existed." There's a close up of it. So this is what I was talking about. In 1961, they found this stone, and it says before this discovery, scholars were questioning the historicity of the man who ordered Jesus' death, and they stopped talking after that. Also, this is just a side note. Also, in the Israel Museum is the Dead Sea Scrolls. This is also what's believed to be Caius's tomb. Here, Caius's coffin,
Small.
and they found Caius's bones in it.
Take a picture.
And that's also that model that I've been showing. That's the Israel. That's a model size of what Israel looked like during the time of Christ. So this would have been Pontius Pilate's palace, because this was the palace that Herod the Great built in Caesarea Maritima. So when the Roman governors took over, that would have been the governor's mansion. That was the big palace. That's where they would have gone. This is what his palace probably would have looked like. And again, this is what Caesarea Maritima would have looked like, typical Roman city. There's where his Pontius Pilate's palace would have been. And he had I'm not sure if he swam in it, but that would have been his swimming pool. So this is somebody did a slide projection summary of Pontius Pilate. I'm gonna cover some of the historical things that we know about Pilate. And it's not just Josephus' accounts. There's also another historian called Philo who lived in Alexandria, Egypt. He didn't actually live in the Holy Land, but he wrote an account of Pontius Pilate. So for the Jewish people, he's not a made-up character. He's an actual historical figure. He's just, in their minds, they see him as an antagonist, a Roman governor antagonist who helped provoke the war that happened that resulted in the temple's destruction. So, Pontius Pilate had a problem with bringing these things into Jerusalem, which is the holy city. Jews did not want these images. Again, we talked about Herod the Great and putting an eagle. Pontius Pilate also had a problem with that, respecting their rules. They didn't want all these emblems of Caesar, because Caesar Tiberius, they called him son of the divine Augustus. He was the son of a god. So this is one of Josephus' accounts, where they brought these. Pontius Pilate, he's in the palace in Caesarea. It says that he removed these standards he's talking about to Jerusalem. It says he took a bold step in subversion of the Jewish practices by introducing into the city the busts of the emperor that were attached to the military standards. For our law forbids the making of images. So we see like a recurring theme. They don't want images and graven images brought into the city of Jerusalem. It was for this reason that the previous prefects, when they entered the city, used standards that had no such ornaments. So we had, it sounds like these four guys before respected their laws, but Pontius Pilate didn't. So that was created a bunch of problems. When they entered the city, used the standards that had no such ornaments. Pilate was the first to bring the images into Jerusalem and set them up, doing it without the knowledge of the people, for he entered at night. But when the people discovered it, they went in a throng to Caesarea. So they sent a whole bunch of people, like several days' journey to Caesarea from Jerusalem. And for many days entreated him to take away the images. He refused to yield, since to do so would be an outrage to the emperor. However, since they did not cease entreating him on the sixth day, he secretly armed and placed his troops in position while he himself came to the speaker's stand. This had been constructed in the stadium. I think that was the Hippodrome that they're talking about, that you see that's right next to the palace, which they made the movie Ben-Hur about, which provided concealment for the army to lay in wait. When the Jews again engaged in supplication at a prearranged signal, he surrounded them with soldiers and threatened to punish them at once with death if they did not put an end to their tumult and return to their own places. But they, casting themselves prostrate and baring their throats, declared that they had gladly welcomed death rather than to make bold to transgress the wise provisions of the law. So Pilate's between a rock and a hard place. He's like, well, if I kill them, then I just probably started an uprising, and if I bend to their demands, then I might look weak. So, but what does he do? He actually does the right thing. Pilate, astonished at the strength of their devotion to the law, straightway removed the images from Jerusalem and brought them back to Caesarea. So he learned from that incident, hey, the Jewish people, they're different. You can't just bring all these foreign gods in. They're not going to accept that. So this is Philo of Alexandria's account. It's a much angrier account than Josephus. Philo sounds like he's pretty angry at this Pontius Pilate. So Pilate was one of the emperor's lieutenants, having been appointed governor of Judea. Philo, he lived at the time. Josephus lived after he was born, about the time that Pontius Pilate was banished. But this historian was alive during the time of Pontius Pilate. So he not more than with the object of doing honor to Tiberius than with the vexing of the multitude dedicated some guilt shields. So he's talking about these shields that he put in. It doesn't actually say what exactly was the problem. I suspect that maybe it was like these Tiberius coins. Tiberius was the emperor at the time, and he was called the son of the divine Augustus. So maybe there was some inscriptions that said he was the son of a god, and that upset them. Because this coin here says Tiberius Caesar. The coins that they had in their pockets at the time, they would have some of them would have a face of Tiberius Caesar, and they would say son of the divine Augustus, because the Romans made Augustus a god. So Tiberius Caesar was the son of a god. Now this is the palace. This is Pilate's palace in Jerusalem. This is Philo's account. Here, let me go back. If you notice that he was in the palace of Herod in the holy city. So this was Herod the Great's palace that he built in Jerusalem, but now it was the Romans. So this is where Pilate. So Philo's describing Pilate as being in this palace in Jerusalem that used to belong to Herod the king. So this is the palace that Pilate's in. And So now they're trying to get the Herod kids involved. Hey, this Pilate, he's stirring up trouble. He's not respecting our laws and our wishes. So what ends up happening is, he says, he records the people saying, "Do not cause a sedition. Do not make war upon us. Do not destroy the peace that exists." So they're saying Tiberius doesn't want this, and Pilate's saying, well, I don't want to offend Tiberius. So again, he goes on talking about his cruelness, his continuous murders of people untried and condemned, and now it says that Tiberius was growing angry with what Pontius Pilate had done. So there's a bunch of exchange of letters, and it says, perceiving that he was inclined to change his mind as to what he had done, but that he was not willing to be thought to do so, wrote a most supplicatory letter to Tiberius. Tiberius is saying, you take those things out of here and bring them to Caesarea. So Tiberius is angry. He wrote a letter reproaching and reviling him in the most bitter manner for his act of unprecedented audacity and wickedness, and commanding him immediately to take down the shields and to convey them away from the metropolis of Judea. The metropolis of Judea is Jerusalem, to Caesarea on the sea, which had been named Caesarea Augusta, and put them in the temple of Augustus. So that's what Pilate did. He obeyed Tiberius, who was the Caesar at the time, and that's where those inscriptions or whatever that Philo was talking about, they ended up in that temple there. There's the Temple of Augustus right there. And that's where it would have ended. Now we know from the book of Luke that there's been problems with Pilate. This says there were present at the season some who told him about the Galileans whose blood Pilate had mingled with their sacrifices. And Jesus answered them, "Do you suppose that these Galileans were worse sinners than all other Galileans because they suffered such things? I tell you no, but unless you repent, you will all likewise perish." So they're saying, what, did these people sin that they deserve whatever Pilate did to them? It sounds like Pilate was trying to put down a rebellion, and he killed these Galileans. He didn't give a trial. He just went in and killed them on the temple while they were sacrificing animals. So here in Luke we see a picture of Pilate being cruel. And then this is so they're saying this, oh well Jesus, did they do something? Did they sin that this came upon them? And Jesus is telling them, no, not everything that happens that's bad is because somebody sinned. So they're asking a theological question. I just have here the book of Job. I wonder if they read the book of Job, where lots of terrible things happened to Job, but it wasn't because he was sinning, and his friends thought he was sinning, but they accused him of that. So this is another incident that happened. Well, actually, I should get close to 12 o'clock, so I'll stop there. Well, thank you all for coming out and thank you for listening to me for the last 3 weeks. And I didn't quite get as far as I didn't get half as far as I thought I would. I mean, I got to about 30 something AD. I guess my original plan was to be like 73 AD, but I got like halfway. But I hope you learned, something new about the Bible. I hope some of the history will help you understand some of the passages that you read. And that's all I got. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey Randy, before we stop, I've always been kind of confused about the word Caesar and
Okay.
who he was or was.
So
Explain that.
Caesar came from Julius Caesar, and then what happened is when they were really good Roman emperors, they just tacked the name on to the next emperor. So
Okay.
actually Nero's name is Nero, Caesar, Augustus, Claudius Nero, I think it is. Like he actually His actual official name is all these previous emperors that were revered,
Okay, so it's nothing to
For
do with
them-
lineage.
and they didn't have Caligula because they didn't revere him.
Okay.
And I think they seem to stop at like 5. I think when they got to 5, they're like,
Oh,
oh, that's enough. Let's just.
It wasn't anything to do with genealogy, right?
What's
It was
Caesar
all,
Augustus?
they were
Yeah,
given
it
that
just
name.
happened to do with the Caesars that were revered before them. So every Caesar after them got Caesar attached to their name, and 'cause for Julius Caesar, and then they got Augustus because they revered him. He was considered one of the best Roman emperors. So
Okay.
that name got tacked on. And then actually Nero's Germanicus, which actually happened to be a military leader, Germanicus. So he actually wasn't a Caesar. So Nero, one of Nero's name was a general in the Roman army. So
Caesar
to make it even more confusing.
Yeah.
Wasn't Caesar Augustus originally Octavian?
Yeah. Yeah, his original name was
Which
Octavian.
kid, you know,
And then
or
they
or
called
run
him
about
Augustus,
fancy
which
and bring
I
back.
believe means revered one. So, and he was such a great emperor for such a long time that everybody after him was Augustus, Caesar Augustus, blah 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 blah.
Good stuff.
All right,
Thank you.
thank you, Randy.
Sure.